Hello and welcome back to Season 2 of Fertility Talks, the Therapy Fertility podcast. I'm your host, Ranae von Meding, and I'm so excited to be back hosting our second season of this podcast. Each week, I'll be sitting down with a different guest and chatting all things fertility. As always, our hope is that through this series, through honest conversation and information, we can strip away some of the stigma that sometimes comes hand in hand with infertility and fertility treatment in Ireland. This week, I'm really excited to welcome someone into the studio who some of you rarely see at Therapy Fertility, but who is certainly a large part of the success of our lab and our embryology team. It is our Embryology Lab Manager, Carol Loscher. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to finally get you into the studio.
You did well.
I know you don't usually like to be on this side of things.
No, it's good. It's good. It's nice to be able to be here and to kind of give an insight into the lab and what we do. So.
Amazing. So first off, let's get to know you a little bit. Where are you from?
So I'm Irish. I'm from Wicklow. I grew up in Wicklow, outside in Roundwood. So yeah, I grew up in Wicklow, school in Dublin, and generally been in Ireland my entire life. So I went to college in UCD, studied pharmacology, and then did my PhD in Trinity College.
And growing up, did you have any idea that you'd end up in this world?
No, I guess growing up, you don't really, science would be kind of like, I loved messing about, very much a tomboy, very into sports and physical activity. Mm-hmm. I liked kind of, being, I guess, hands-on stuff, I guess. So I'd say from that point of view, but I didn't really know what careers were available.
Were you the kind of kid who was blowing things up?
No. Not to
crazy
extent,
science experiments.
No, not particularly science, but definitely messing outside.
Yeah.
Or, following my dad around the place. Mm-hmm. Whatever he was doing, I was doing. Nothing science. Like, science got introduced to us in secondary school. So from straight away, loved it from the beginning. So so from early on, I kind of knew I liked science. I think I liked the kind of methodical way that things are done, and then obviously it's very from my own perspective, things are very exciting. Yeah. You have an aim or what you're going to do and what happens. It was just a whole new world. So
you did pharmacology first?
Pharmacology first as an undergraduate degree.
Okay.
And then after that, obviously, you have your basic science degree. So I decided to do a PhD in genetics. So I moved over to Trinity College.
And at that point, did you know that you were going to go into embryology?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, you don't really know all these fields exist, So I guess it depends on, like science is very general and it's very broad, incredibly broad. So you're trying to kind of find your way. So by going in through genetics, even when I finished my PhD and I was doing postdoctoral research, and at that point, it was a lot into kind of stem cells and kind of culturing cells, which you could equate in some way to embryology, as in the methods aren't vastly dissimilar. But yeah, it wasn't embryology. But after that, then I kind of just felt like, I guess you got to reach a crossroads. You stay in research and stay in kind of the universities, but I felt I kind of wanted to get closer to patients, kind of close to the clinical side of things, and feel like I wanted to, as much as basic research and making an impact to patients, it's kind of hard to feel that back. So I kind of felt like I wanted to be kind of slightly closer to kind of feel that clinical side.
So how did you find your way into embryology then?
Bit bizarre, in that I was looking at the clinical scientist route. So Ireland's a little bit it doesn't have a clinical scientist pathway like the way the UK would, but there is a role called like a clinical embryologist. So in the UK, that's well defined. So I was kind of looking at the UK actually, and looking at positions in Scotland and other places, and interviewed for those. And then it just so happened on the FOSS website one day, an ad came up for a trainee embryologist in Dublin.
Really? So, on FOSS website?
Yeah, literally.
Just wouldn't have thought that.
Just wouldn't have thought it. And it wouldn't necessarily, obviously there's lots of job websites and stuff at the time. But just popped up and I was like, gotta go for it. So obviously I went for it and felt so privileged to actually get the job. And I still remember where I was when I got the phone call and, all the rest. So
so how long ago was that?
So that was a kind of mid 2010.
Okay.
I would say. Yeah.
And you've been working in this field ever since?
In the field ever since. Yeah. So lots of skills that relate from, like science is science, in a broad scale of things. Obviously I had a lot to learn from the practical side, and then it's a different field theoretically, I guess. But yeah, lots to learn, and it is very much nearly like an apprenticeship in some ways, in that you learn all your practical skills on the job. Yeah, by doing. That's the only real way.
And I believe that's kind of what some of the embryologists in therapy are doing at the moment.
Yeah, and it is something we like to nurture. You know, you need to. There's not many homegrown Irish embryologists, so obviously it's great to be able to kind of have been through the process and then train embryologists up. So yeah, we do have a trainee embryologist, but we're always learning anyway, and we're always looking at things to change and improve. So yeah, there's a lot of learning that goes on in the lab, a lot of training.
And I believe it's quite a small number of people who actually work in this field, because I remember saying this to you before and you told me like a number and I was like, what is that all? Like, I just kind of had a picture that there would be like thousands of embryologists in the country, but that's not the case, is it?
No, it's not. Like, I mean, you know, I guess when you think of how many fertility clinics there's quite a good number of them in Dublin, but they're scattered outside of that, like, you know, 2 in Cork, 1 in Galway. So yeah, I mean, within each lab you're having, you know, somewhere between generally 5 to kind of 10 staff. So it doesn't add up to a lot of embryologists, and a lot of those are from outside of Ireland, you know, when we're looking for expertise. As I said, because we don't have a pathway to train up per se, it's a lot of on the job. So yeah, no, it's a privilege to be able to train and mentor our trainee embryologist in therapy, and to kind of show them. And there's so much to learn. It's not just the practical side of things. There's a lot of quality management side of things, and just making sure our standards are really high.
Well, it's such a cool space to visit. I've been in the lab a few times, and it's just so amazing to see all the things you do, and there's such a nice kind of environment. Like it's real, like there's a real sense of family in there.
Yeah,
you know?
It is. Like, I mean, if anyone does come into Therapy Fertility, and, you know, feel free to come down the corridor and have a look in.
Peek your head through
we have a glass window that you can look in. Yeah, I mean, it's a room, and for the most part, when we go in, we're in there for the day. Obviously we come out for lunch and go back in. So yeah, it does feel like a family, of course it does. And it's very interactive, and it's a lot of hands-on work. So you're at one hood and you're working, you know, away, and there's a lot of communication between each other as to, have you done this, or where are you with that? And, you know, it's very much a team effort. So yeah, like the team is just paramount in the lab. Yeah. So communication has to work really well. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about all the things you do in the lab, because I know a lot of people kind of don't really understand what happens in the lab. I think most people understand that like the success of a fertility clinic is largely down to the lab, but they don't really see it. You know, they see the nurses, they see the doctors, they don't really see the embryologists. So they don't necessarily know what is actually going on.
No.
So the kind of like the 3 main things you're dealing with in the lab are essentially sperm, eggs, and embryos. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So anything to do with sperm, eggs, embryos.
Yeah.
So what are those different things?
So yeah, like, so it's an array of things. I guess you know, the most part people think of IVF, they think of a full, what we would call a cycle of IVF, which does involve collecting eggs, then taking the sperm sample, preparing the sperm, and then we create embryos. Like, in the, you know, a broad scale of things, that's the thing we do most often. But obviously there's other procedures, then like an IUI, which is where we prepare sperm, and then that sperm is inseminated back into the female. We do egg freezing, which is collecting eggs, freezing them and putting them into storage for long-term storage. And as well, we also freeze sperm for males that want to preserve their fertility too. And then we, you know, it's kind of similar. We've frozen embryo transfers is what we term them. So that's another kind of cycle that we would do, where we thaw an embryo for transfer. So these are embryos that are created on a previous cycle, and the patient is returning to have an embryo transferred back. So it's kind of like a whole array of things, and all these things tend to happen, you know, in synchrony and together, and we know what we're doing, and they're scheduled in together. So at any one, if you took a snapshot in time in the lab, there's a lot of things going on. You could have eggs being collected, eggs being prepared for ICSI, we call it stripping or denudation. Then you might also at this, you know, have fertilization checks that same day for the egg collection that happened the day before. We're communicating with patients, updating them their results. And then we're also checking grades of embryos and transferring back embryos of good quality, but also we have surplus embryos then that we need to freeze and put into storage for patients.
So there could be just so many different things going on.
There's a lot of things going on. Like, when eggs come in to the lab, a few minutes later, we'll also get a sperm sample into the lab for that couple, or we're thawing sperm, maybe donor sperm for that couple, that patient as well. So there's a lot of things going on, and they all have to time up. And I guess what people don't see is how carefully orchestrated it is. That there's times.
It is. You have a giant flat screen up on the wall.
We do.
Everybody's like, what's happening?
We have
who's doing
a display. Yeah, it's like being in the airport nearly. You have a display of all the people.
It's great though, because it's like a really well-oiled machine.
It's really well-oiled, yeah. And it has to be like that.
Because everything is so time sensitive.
It is.
I actually didn't realize how time sensitive some of the things. I was watching one of your team doing an egg freezing the other day, and watching them prepare the eggs for freezing, and literally they have the timers, all of the different kind of cultures they're putting them in and moving them around, and it's literally down to the second.
It's very precise, so egg freezing and embryo freezing is very critical on times, and you could have 2 timers out, and you set your timer for 4 minutes, and you'll have a number of things kind of at the same time. You're moving eggs into really small droplets, so you're talking say 50 microliters, so it's a very small droplet for 4 minutes or whatever, and then you're moving them around. So it is very precise. You've lots of timers beeping, and you cannot be distracted. A lot of focus, very diligent. It's really precise work when you think the size of an egg, so an egg is like 120 say microliters, so it is, or micron, sorry. So it is the biggest cell in the body, but it's
still tiny.
It is super tiny. Like, it's kind of like the width of a hair if you want, but it is super tiny. So it's very precise work with really fine pipettes that we use to be able to move eggs around and embryos around. And with all that, there's traceability. We have to be really clear and witness a lot of our procedures and make sure that we're performing them to our
What does
protocols.
Witness mean?
Yeah, so witnessing like that, all the procedures we explain in the lab, they're happening, but at the same time, there's a lot of checks. So the lab is checking all the time. So every single dish in the lab will have a label on it with all of your identifiers, your first name, surname, chart number, and date of birth. Every tube will have the same. So anytime there's eggs or embryos or sperm in the tube, it'll have all the details. And anytime we need to move those eggs or embryos from one dish to another or inseminate with sperm, it involves a witness step. So what that means is that we have to call a second person. So we literally say, can I have a witness?
Yeah, because I've heard it so many times, and it sounds like, can I have a witness?
So there's a lot of shouting in the lab going, witness, can I have a witness? But that's literally what you do. So you say, can I have a witness? And whoever's not busy at that moment in time will come, and you have to get that witness. So the witness will arrive, and it just involves a calling out and calling back of the details that you can see on your stage. So you call out all the details that are there, and the witness then reads from the paperwork or from the electronic record that we have, and then reads back, and we just confirm it's the same person. But of course we have an electronic system as well, which is fantastic, called RI Witness. We have a safety net as well on top of that. So there's a lot of checks going on, which does take time, and it does take, there's lots of signatures written down and all the rest. So it is very precise and very controlled.
I suppose that just makes sure that it triple makes sure that no mistakes are made.
Oh, absolutely. And it has to be like that. Yeah. That's the way it has to be.
I know, because I know sometimes people are like, how are you sure they used my eggs, or how are you sure they used, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, we would have an entire record of how we are sure. Yeah. So everything is traceable. Yeah. And everything is controlled, and there's witness points for everything.
Yeah, and it's so important when you're talking about.
Yeah. And it's not really something that maybe people want, patients really want to overly think about as well. I can understand that might, be something that you kind of, but it should be a reassuring thing to know that of all the steps that we have in place. And Ireland's quite tightly regulated, to be honest.
Yeah.
So all the labs in Ireland would be very similar in that way. So it is a very tightly regulated thing, and it has to be. It has to be.
Yeah. Let's talk about sperm for a minute, because a lot of times people forget about the sperm, and we talk about eggs so much in embryos. What do you do when it comes to sperm in the lab? I know, like, someone would come in and produce a sample and pass it through the hatch.
Yeah.
What happens then when you take that into the lab? Yeah,
so it depends. Like, sometimes we've a male patient coming for a semen analysis, and then there's another time a male patient might come for an IUI or an IVF or ICSI cycle. So for a semen analysis, we're just looking at a lot of parameters. We're just looking at the sample. It doesn't have at the end of that process, the sample is discarded, and it's purely just to look at the count, the motility,
like an
the
investigation.
Volume. Yeah, it's like kind of getting your bloods done.
Yeah,
and
you're just having a look and you'll get some information about it.
Yeah, and very much on the quantity. So semen analysis looks a lot at quantity of sperm. So how many, what percentage are moving, how fast are they moving? Are they progressing kind of quickly, or kind of going around in circles a little bit, or might be sitting on the spot and not moving? So you're kind of trying to classify the sperm into different categories. And we have the WHO the semen analysis kind of manual, which kind of gives you the normal kind of ranges.
Parameters,
parameters. So it kind of just goes like that. So anyone who's attended for a semen analysis will be very familiar with how that kind of report comes out. Basically, we're just trying to identify if you have a normal semen sample, and therefore a sample suitable for an IUI or an IVF for the most part, or if there's anything, if we've a low count, low motility, we might recommend ICSI for you in that situation. There's another test we might do on the day called DNA fragmentation, which kind of looks at more the quality of the sperm. And it's not generally for everyone, because it costs an extra bit of money, but it's a good test to perform. And that's really looking at double and single stranded breaks in the DNA. So when you think of a sperm, you think of, it's got a little head and a mid piece and a long tail. So the DNA is stored in the little head. Okay. So it's the DNA fragmentation test is just looking for double and single stranded breaks. And someone maybe with a high DNA frag might be, there's kind of like a link with, less likely to result in a live birth, if you have a high DNA frag.
Yeah, so maybe if someone's come in and there's been reoccurrent miscarriages, or they have maybe some health condition that maybe. Yeah.
Exactly. And in those cases, it's good to know, it's good, the information's everything. So when you have that information, there's certain lifestyle changes you can do to try reduce the DNA frag. Now, it takes about 3 months to produce sperm. So, it could take 3 months of good lifestyle habits to see an effect. And if you have the time to do that, that's obviously recommended. But, there are alternative options. For example, ICSI could be recommended for someone with a high DNA frag.
So that's literally just taking a single sperm and injecting
it? Yeah. So ICSI is another way of inseminating eggs, where we will inject a single sperm into each egg, as opposed to IVF, where we put the eggs are in a dish and the sperm is added in, and they kind of find their own way in, for want of a better word.
Yeah, so is ICSI normally used when there is an issue?
A male factor, yeah. So if there's kind of a male factor, we'll do ICSI, or if we've had, potentially a reduced fertilization maybe in a previous cycle, we might recommend ICSI. But generally it's the doctor looking at all of their history. There's a lot more to it than just the semen analysis.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when it comes to sperm, how important is it in the, end result? Is the egg the most important thing? Is the sperm the most important thing? Or are they equally as important? Like, so if someone comes in and they have like a, let's say, poor semen analysis result, is it still possible that they could produce really healthy embryos and in turn, a successful pregnancy?
Yeah, the main kind of thing we're trying to look at when we look at semen, like the sperm sample, the quality of the sperm sample is as important as the eggs, for sure. It's harder to see egg quality for, you really need to kind of create embryos and see how they progress to kind of really know an egg. It's hard to assess the quality of an egg by looking at it. Whereas sperm, we have our criteria, and we can say the likelihood of those sperm being able to fertilize those eggs, which is why we decide ICSI or IVF. So they're both, as important as each other. And for people that are experiencing fertility issues, there might be, a third is kind of egg factor related, a third of patients might be, sperm or male factor. And then sometimes, there's a third that are just joint combined factor. So obviously it's super important. And I guess we tend to focus a lot on the female. Sometimes maybe it's something we take on ourselves and we always kind of own it. Whereas obviously there's two parties in it. And I guess the testing and everything for sperm hasn't maybe progressed maybe as too much over the last few years, and ICSI is the kind of main way to treat a lot of male factor issues, which, as I said, is injecting a sperm into an egg, and that can overcome a lot. Yeah. But no doubt, lifestyle and changes are just as important.
Okay, let's talk about the Embryo-Scope, because that's one of the coolest bits of kit that you have in the lab.
It's one of the most expensive as well.
It is. So how much are they?
Like over 100,000. So you're over 120,000. They are expensive. But yeah, they are very reliable. They're very stable, and they're just they're amazing piece of equipment. So you don't own them personally, but no. You oversee two of them. We oversee two of them, and they're safely positioned in the lab. They're fantastic. What they are able to do is provide uninterrupted culture for the embryos that we create. So when we do have eggs collected and we do inseminate them with sperm, and those embryos are placed into the Embryscope incubator in a special dish that holds up to, say, 16 eggs or 16 embryos. And what it allows us to do, it's uninterrupted. Normally, traditional embryology, you'd have to remove embryos from an incubator to have a look on the microscope and then put them back. Every time we remove embryos from their environment, so they want a really specific pH, they want a really nice temperature, they want to be kept kind of cozy. If we remove them to have a look at them on a microscope, the pH will change for a little bit, and obviously this is thing that happens in embryology, but we try to minimize the amount of time embryos or eggs or anything are out of an incubator. So the Embryscope allows us uninterrupted culture because it has a camera. So the camera is able to take a picture of every embryo in every position over a period incubation of six days. So you end up with a video, and we can assess the embryos by looking at the computer, and we can see the images and the development of the embryos over time. So it's so cool, like to be able to see.
It is the coolest
embryo.
thing. We have videos of our kids. Yeah.
No way.
As little time lapse.
Oh wow,
it's very cool.
That is cool. Because obviously that is amazing. So it's like we create these, but we don't necessarily know which ones will form the babies. Obviously we find all that out later, but I think it is fantastic, like to be able to kind of see the images. So we'll send you can see the images, and like that videos are available for patients if they request them. We'll be able to send a video to them, but it's fantastic. Like but for us it's not about that, of course. It's about being able to see the chain, how they divide. So an embryo starts off as one cell, then it'll split to two, and then 3, 4, and it continues to divide. But that gives us so much information, and a lot more information than we'd be able to see if we took static snapshots in time.
If you only saw them once a day,
or you minimize it so you might not see them on day 2 because you don't want to interrupt their culture. Whereas in this case we can see them the whole way through.
So does that help in terms of embryo grading?
It does. It helps a lot. It helps to be able to select the best. I mean, sometimes you might have 2 or 3 good quality blastocysts, but it's able to differentiate between those and pick the embryo that you feel would have the best chance of forming a pregnancy, so that embryo is transferred back first. So it's on selection.
I'm sure most people listening to this know what a blastocyst is, but for anyone who doesn't, what is it?
So a blastocyst is a stage of development of an embryo. So an embryo starts off as one cell, which is the egg, and it's fertilized. You can see 2 little dots in the middle, which is DNA from mum and dad. As I was saying, that divides over time, but it undergoes a lot of change. So it might get to like an 8 cell, 10 cell, day 3, day 4. But when it gets to day 4, all the cells connect. And day 5, it just completely transforms. There's no other way. You kind of nearly need to search blastocyst for me to
anyone listening to this,
see it.
Search a picture and see it. It's really cool.
And it completely transforms, and it starts to
kind of explodes.
Kind of transforms and cavitates. So you start to see a fluid-filled center in the middle, and it literally grows and starts to push out on the little kind of jelly-like shell that surrounds an embryo, and starts to push out. And at that point, you see a differentiation of 2 cell types. the little bundle of cells that goes to form the fetus, and then all of the other cells that kind of make that ball-like structure that help with implantation, make the placenta and that type of stuff. So when we talk about a blastocyst, that's where we want to be. We want to get to the blastocyst stage for a day 5 transfer.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's...
Okay, so in terms of embryo grading, what phrases or terms do you use to describe...
Blast.
Yeah, the best. So what is the best?
Yeah, so like grading, people get really hung up on.
Yeah.
The lab's job is to decide what is a good quality embryo, what's a good quality blastocyst, and an embryo that's suitable for transfer or for freeze. And those are the ones that have a chance of forming a pregnancy. So it is subjective, okay? And when we grade embryos, they're graded in alphanumeric. So it has, you'll see 3 digits, and you know, the first one is 1 to 6. That just describes the expansion. And then after that, the second is an A, B, or C, and the third digit is an A, B, or C. So we grade the embryo, the quality, very much in A, B, C. Mm-hmm. And anything with an A or B quality is good quality, and it's suitable for transfer or freeze. So, you know, it's something that's quite hard to explain, but it depends how many cells, say, for example, make up the 2 types of cells that form a blastocyst. Are they nice and compact? Is it nice and clear? You know, is it, you know, there's lots of kind of, but it is subjective, and it's
subjective, but also, so like, is it kind of both up to the embryologist who's grading this embryo, and like in conjunction with the Embryo Because like,
the Embryo Scope will also give a score. So the Embryscope's looking at timings, like at what time did it go from, you know, a 1 cell to a 2 cell or 2. So there's a lot of timings, and they have a score as well that guides us.
And how often do the scores with the Embryscope link up to
they do, yeah. So generally we're choosing first with morphology. So we're choosing based on the appearance of the embryo, first of all. And the score would only be to kind of, if you wanted to distinguish between 2 really good quality embryos.
Just to choose which one you're going to use first.
Exactly. So if you had an AA quality, 2 AA quality embryos, you start going back, looking at
to
the video,
see the timestamps on when things
and
happened.
You don't just trust the score, but you go back and look at the video, see how they divided. There's lots of sometimes divisions that don't occur as you expect. You know, you could have a 1 cell embryo split immediately into 3 cells. That wouldn't be what we'd expect. So you kind of look back at the video and see which follow the most normal pattern of development.
And that's when you have like a few to choose from.
That's when but like, you know, in general, if it's made a good quality embryo, a blastocyst, that's trying to select between them as to which one to transfer back first.
Yeah.
You know, a good quality blastocyst has the, you know, potential to form a pregnancy. It's just the selection of which to put back first.
Just fascinating, isn't it? It's such a cool like field to work in, because it's so like, it's all science. But it's also like the end result is hopefully a person. I
think, well, this is it. Like the lab is, you know, you're in your own little space. We're a little bit disconnected from, you know, the patients as such. We'll see them at egg collection, at transfer. We'll communicate with them on the portal, you know, or the odd phone call. But, you know, we're very much kind of at the kind of non-personal side of it with the embryos. So when we hear the stories coming back from patients, and, you know, little messages or reviews left, like, you know, it lifts the entire lab, the entire clinic actually. So it's lovely to kind of hear that stuff back, and kind of reminds us of what we're dealing with, you know, because you know, it's a fascinating field, and it's such a pleasure and privilege to be able to kind of help people on their journey, to get there and hopefully support them through it, and kind of, like, it is amazing. It is.
I've heard before the phrase that the embryologist is your baby's first babysitter.
And it is like, technically, you know, like as you're saying, your kids, you have the video of them on the Embryo Scope of them developing. So at the time, the embryologist is just seeing the embryos that they don't think of the, you know, so to be able to kind of put that with the child, I find just fascinating to go, oh my God, that was you. Or
and I was watching you for 5 days.
Because at that moment in time, we're not seeing it like that, because we see it as potential.
We don't, because most of the embryos won't result in babies, but
we don't know. But when if someone comes back, or they show us a scan and they're like, oh yeah, I'm 11 weeks pregnant, and we're like, oh, that was the embryo. You know, it's fascinating. Like it just it's so rewarding to know that you're making a difference, and it's just magical, really. Like you know, it's amazing. You know that you kind of have to remind yourself, like, sometimes of, you know, you're so process driven and everything's just going to a timeline, but like you're making such an impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Science, love, and magic.
Absolutely.
Okay, so just to finish up, I have a couple of questions for you, and you've actually already answered some of them. The first one was, how small is the human egg? And you talked
Tiny.
about that. But talk about that in relation to the sperm, because I just find that fascinating.
So a sperm is about 20 times smaller. So an egg is, say, 100 to 120 microns, which is hard for people to be able to see. So you could see an egg with the naked eye. In reality, you'd have a hard enough time, okay? But it's about the width of a hair. Then, say, a skin cell would be 4 times smaller than an egg, and a sperm would be 20 times smaller. So a sperm cell would be like 0.005.
And would that be one of the smallest cells?
Yes,
in the human body.
Yeah,
and the egg would be one of the biggest.
Yeah. So when you see, like, you know, it's quite funny.
You see like the giant egg, and then like
it is exactly like that.
Like,
so you see, when you're looking at FIRT checks for IVF, so at that point we've inseminated an egg, we've got a dish with a number of eggs, and we've put sperm in, and you're checking them the next day, and it is like sperm are like kind of glittery in the media, you know, in the liquids that they're in. You kind of see them shimmering. But then they get to the egg, and you can see the egg, and you can see like a number of sperm have kind of buried in. So they've kind of put their head and they've kind of buried in. And sometimes the egg is moving because all the sperm are trying to fight in. Yeah, but they're so tiny. Yeah. They're so tiny. It's hard to explain. But yeah, they really are so small.
Yeah. Okay, so does the grading of the embryos really affect the outcome of the transfer and, you know, a potential pregnancy? Or is it possible to get pregnant and have a healthy baby with what may be classed as, you know, a poorer,
lower grade?
Lower grade. Yeah,
absolutely. Look, so you can have embryos that don't look as pretty for one, you know, so you've just got amazing, beautiful blastocysts, and you transfer that back, and that is definitely going to result in a pregnancy, and it may, of course, or it might, you know, you might be surprised when it didn't. And then you might have an embryo that's like what we call a BB grade, so that's kind of on the lower end, still a good quality blastocyst, and, you know, off they go and form a positive pregnancy. So, like, you know, there might be a slightly higher chance with an AA grade over an AB or a BB, but it is like splitting hairs, to be honest. So I would not get hung up on grading. It is subjective. We all know what a good quality blastocyst looks like, and those are the embryos that are transferred and frozen. Yeah,
because I know people do get hung up on it, and like the reality is the clinic is not going to transfer something that, you know, you don't believe has a chance.
And generally speaking, when we have a poor quality embryo with CC, like it's very obvious that it's a poor quality. Either it might not have an inner cell mass, it might be missing some part, or really few cells around the outside, so it just doesn't have a chance, or it might be degenerating, or, you know, if you know, it's very clear, you know, speaking what is a poor quality embryo, unfortunately.
So in general, people don't need to get too hung up.
I wouldn't get hung up. There is, if you are one of our patients on the portal, there's a resource area, and we have a bit of a document there about grading, so you can see, just explaining it. It more explains, run through the whole detail of the grading scheme. So use a Gardner grading scheme. So there's lots more detail there. If you'd like to look it up.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Do you ever see twin pregnancies resulting from a single embryo, or how likely is that for one embryo to split?
It does happen, but it's the rarest type of twin. You know, most twin pregnancies are when 2 embryos are put back. So to get one embryo put back and splitting, it's not something it's possible to see that in the lab. If you had one blastocyst and you saw 2 inner cell masses on the one blast, it's not something I can say I've ever seen, but it does. Some embryologists I've seen have reported that, and they, you know, but in generally speaking, the risk of having a twin pregnancy where one embryo splits is, as you know, what it's like in the normal population. So it's unlikely to happen. It's when we transfer 2 embryos back, of course, your multiple pregnancy rate increases.
I do know 2 separate families who transferred 2 and ended up with 3.
These things happen.
You're cringing. You're like, no.
I am, because I'm a mum of twins. So the idea...
I didn't realise you had twins.
Yeah, I do. So the idea of having 3 would freak me out.
And was that a naturally occurring twin
yeah,
pregnancy?
Yeah.
Does it run in the family?
Everyone always asks me that, and it's like, no, not really.
That's like people asking me when I say I'm diabetic, asking me, does it run in the family? I'm like, no.
Not really. Like, I go, oh, this one, obviously there's history of twins.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like my mum had twins or my granny had twins.
Sure.
It's not in the maternal line.
Yeah.
So the idea of being pregnant with triplets now freak me out.
Fair. Okay. Very last question I have for you is, what is your favorite thing about your job? Not to put you on the spot.
Very broad.
If there's one thing that just makes you really happy about what you do, what is it?
Well, obviously it's the bigger picture, and it's knowing that all this meticulous work that we do, and the running of the lab and cleaning the lab, everything being like clockwork in the lab, obviously that makes me happy, and that's what we look at every day. But like on the broad scale of things, it's our results, it's seeing our patients leave happy, whatever their outcome is. But obviously, seeing people's, getting pregnant and getting those amazing results is fantastic. Yeah. So it has to be obviously, the outcome for our patients, and trying to help them along their journey and make it as stress-free as possible, and hopefully with that, positive outcome.
Amazing. Well, lovely to chat to you. I could talk about the lab all day. I love it. It's one of my favorite places in the clinic.
Well,
so
you're welcome anytime.
Thank you.
Not at all. Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Fertility Talks, the Therapy Fertility podcast. If you have, please rate, review, and subscribe. For more information on the services we offer, you can visit www.therapyfertility.com.